I invite you to please pray with me. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of every heart here be acceptable in your sight. For you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. It's interesting, I did not know what the anthem would be when I was planning this sermon. America, what will your legacy be? That was one of the things that was going on yesterday with 5 different congregations from 4 different towns, hearing the story of 4 other congregations from 4 different towns. Talk about how do we live into the blessing that we have been given of doing justice, being merciful and showing mercy, and walking humbly with God. It was a time of wrestling together. How do we live into that promise from the prophet Micah to do justice, to be merciful? Really, in Hebrew, the word is to be compassionate as a mother is compassionate for the child in her womb, and to walk humbly with God. Sometimes it can seem like the passages from Scripture and our current life really intersect and make sense and connect and bring the Holy One closer to where God would have us be, giving our best and being our best, being in right relationship with one another. But at first glance, it can seem like the story from the Gospel of Matthew this morning. It can seem like an impossibility. How can faith cause a mountain to move from one place to another? How can the demons that plague us, whether it is opiate abuse or the free-floating anxiety, which is in this country so much right now, or the fear of neighbors, or what has happened in Milford, where the Ku Klux Klan has blanketed certain neighborhoods with their hate mail, and even included the police chief in Milford in that. The Ku Klux Klan was an organization founded after the American Civil War to terrorize freed slaves. And those newsletters, which are protected free speech, appeared on the driveways in Milford this week. How can we do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with God in the midst of this? I think first we have to realize we never do it alone. We always do work in community. We always are stronger together, which is why those churches came together yesterday to wrestle with what does it mean to be church right now in the 21st century. And I think we got some good hints and some good opportunities from that. But I think if you look a little closer at this scripture from Matthew this morning, we kind of have a how-to guide on how to move forward with doing justice and being merciful and walking humbly with God. Now, Jesus' listeners in that day, every story has a context. They had a big advantage over us, right? They had Jesus right in front of them. That's advantage number 1. But number 2, when he told that story, everyone that he told the story to would have known the context of moving mountains. And that's something I didn't even understand until 5 years ago. I was privileged to be able to go to the land of Israel and also to Jordan on a pilgrimage trip. And that was the usual pilgrimage trip where you take the whirlwind visit here, you go to see the Sea of Galilee, you spend time in Bethlehem and the West Bank. And there was one other stop that we made besides Jerusalem, which really caught my eye. About 10 miles outside of Jerusalem, there is a very tall mountain. At the top of that mountain is the most spectacular set of ruins. Underneath the mountain, you can see 3 sets of Roman baths that used to be there. You can see this road that's very steep and narrow, but wide enough for the Jeep that was going up in front of us with a bride hanging on the back end along with her groom, because they were going up to the very top of Herodian to have their marriage ceremony at the top of this huge mountain. Well, it turned out the mountain had been moved. All of what we were walking on, or the vast majority of it, had been moved from the north side of that valley to where we were in Herodian. Because King Herod, who built it, wanted his ultimate place, his best fortress, his, showplace, if you will, to be the highest around. And so he literally had ordered people to move a mountain. Basket full of dirt, basket full of stone, over years to build up this mountain to the point where they could put his new fortress city on top. And by the way, include with it, a 5,000-seat amphitheater, a royal palace, walls, you name it. Herod had thought of everything, except the fact that he wasn't going to live forever, so it became his tomb as well. But hearers that Jesus heard that story about moving mountains with faith, they would have known that story about Herodian, that oftentimes when we live with faith, it doesn't happen instantly. You have to be persistent. And I think our passage from Matthew can show us how we can deal with some of this trouble that we're dealing with now as a people, as churches, and as a country. That the blessings of liberty might be for all people. First, you have to have a connection with God. That's that walking humbly with God. In Hebrew scriptures, when you get to the end of the story, it's kind of like in German. When you get to the end, you finally can figure out what the rest of the sentence is supposed to mean. If any of you have ever taken German lessons, it's pretty confusing until you get to where, oh, that's what that means. It's always at the end of the sentence. And in Hebrew, that emphasis is there too. So walking humbly with God has to be first. So we have to open ourselves up through prayer and thanksgiving. As Jesus said, this particular demon can only be cast out by prayer. So that's where we start. But then there's that next part, which is faith that gives you the opportunity to say that yes, this can happen, and believe that it can happen. I mentioned the Ku Klux Klan earlier, and they are active still. Yet the founder of the Ku Klux Klan was a man named Nathan Bedford Forrest. He was one of the founders of it at the end of the Civil War. Nathan Bedford Forrest had been a slave trader. He'd made millions in New Orleans in the business. And yet, after the Civil War, he changed. 10 years after the war, this man who had helped found the Klan became a Christian. And he wound up speaking publicly about including people of all colors, but specifically black and white, and women and men, in this inclusive embrace, which is the love of God for all of creation and for all people. It was so that even the rest of his friends disowned him. But he kept at it, even to the point where publicly, when he had finished speaking one time, because one person had caused him to question what he was doing, and that questioning led him to faith, and led him to change, and led him to go from being a hate monger to someone who was inclusive. And at one of his public speaking events, a former slave who was a woman came up and kissed him. And here's Nathan Bedford Forrest. He embraced this person that before he might have quit. And they together showed the way for a country to become more than what they thought they could be. The other thing I think we learn from Jesus' story and putting it in context of Herodian, that we have to keep at it. It's one day at a time. It's one step at a time. It's like our pilgrim forefathers and foremothers who came here. They didn't come to a well-built little community in Plymouth. Half of them died that first winter. And yet, they invited their neighbors who had taken care of them to have a Thanksgiving feast. That's the origin of the feast that we celebrate this week. It's of neighbors coming together who had formerly been strangers and sharing what they had and enjoying it. And it was quite a party. It actually went on for a lot more than one day. But we have that opportunity to. We have that opportunity to walk humbly with God, to open ourselves to God, to be merciful, to be inclusive with one another, and to speak out for justice. Because whenever any of our neighbors are hurt, we become less. Nathan Bedford Forrest had realized that in the process of putting someone else down, he himself was not who he could be. He had become less than the human being that God had created him to be, that best that the song was talking about. We have that opportunity to live into that best day by day and to speak up when there is a time to say what needs to be said, and there's a time to just show kindness, to be inclusive. In 1841, Hopedale was founded to be a community that would be a light to this area, a hope in the dale. Hope is one thing, but as Rita Moreno, who was the original star in West Side Story, said, hope is the thing that's in the future, but faith is how you live the dance today. And so I invite you in that spirit of liveliness and dance to listen as Tony and I read together the declaration, the pastoral letter that Father Bill is reading this morning as well at Sacred Heart. For this is a united letter that is coming from the faith leaders to our communities this morning in Hopedale. We, the clergy of the Hopedale congregations, write with a united pastoral voice, speaking to all who live, work, and do business in our town, calling all of us to reject bigotry, hatred, and violence.
Since its founding, Hopedale has been a community dedicated to shared community life and the ideals of respect and peace among all. Even when labor and management did not always agree during the era of the Draper Corporation, Hopedale retained a spirit of cooperation and community that was inclusive of all, regardless of their economic or political views. Since that time, Hopedale has continued to be a welcoming community.
The recent presidential campaign and election has subjected the nation to a constant barrage of inflammatory rhetoric. In its wake, there has been a rise in hateful speech and hurtful, even violent behavior directed at immigrants and refugees, people of color, of different ethnicities, of different genders and sexual orientations and political persuasions. Many of our friends and neighbors, even members of our families and our congregations, are afraid for their safety because of who they are, or what they look like, where they're from, or what religion they practice.
As faith leaders in this community, we pledge to reject hatred and racism. Our various faith traditions call us to challenge and resist those who would harass, intimidate, or harm immigrants and refugees, people of color, our transgendered and LGBTQIA brothers and sisters, and our Muslim and Jewish siblings in faith. We pledge to rebuke and rebuff those who create discord by demeaning and attacking others. We promise to work together to protect and defend all who may be targeted because of who they are.
We've pledged to work together to keep Hopedale a place of peace, where everyone is welcomed, accepted, and respected. We promise to affirm the differences that some would use to divide us. We call on you, all the people of Hopedale, to join us in our promises to reject discrimination and violence of thought, word, and deed. We call on you to join us in affirming the dignity and worth of all people as equal children of God. Yours in faith, Reverend Sarah Hubble,
Reverend Anthony Lorenzen,
and for Father William Kanicki. It is about Thanksgiving. We've been blessed with so much. Let us not forget that the only way you can give thanks is really to share it. So we invite you this morning to share the best of yourselves with one another and with all whom you meet. And in that spirit, happy Thanksgiving.